Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Many times, when a player bound for the Hall of Fame retires, they look to continue their career in football in some capacity. Some of them, like Mike Ditka and Raymond Berry, go to the coaching route and look to share their knowledge with other players. But then there are some that go with the broadcasting route and decide to share their knowledge with the viewing audience at home. Troy Aikman has pulled this off successfully for the better part of 2 decades. Terry Bradshaw has been doing this in some capacity since the 1980s. And Merlin Olsen was one of the top color commentators for quite some time, consistently getting the marquee NBC game. But it doesn't always work out. For every Hall of Famer that makes the transition to the booth and makes it look easy, well, there's Hall of Famers that make you wonder how they ever got the job in the first place and make broadcasting look like the hardest job in the world. This is Joe Greene. You probably know him for being one of the greatest defensive linemen in the history of the sport, or for being the guy in one of the greatest advertisements of all time. But what you might not know is that in 1982, after retiring, he tried his hand at broadcasting. And he was awful. He was so bad, in fact, that he got fired after just 6 games. And this is the story behind this absolute train wreck. Before I talk about what Joe Greene did in the booth, and trust me, there are so many clips that we will get to later in the video that truly exemplify how awful he was, we need some context to understand just how great of a player he was, as well as why he wanted to go into the booth in the first place. In 1969, the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted Mean Joe Greene out of North Texas with the 4th pick in the NFL draft, and the rest is history. If I listed every single accolade that Greene had during his time with the Steelers, this video would be an hour long. So here's just some of the highlights. He made it to the Pro Bowl 10 times in his career, including each of his first 8 seasons. He was named a first-team All-Pro 4 times, and a second-team All-Pro twice. From 1969 to 79, in his first 11 seasons in the league, Greene was either named a Pro Bowler or a first-team All-Pro every single season. The accolades don't stop there. He was named the AP Defensive Rookie of the Year in 1969, was named the AP Defensive Player of the Year in 1972 and 1974, was named the NFL Man of the Year in 1979, and was named to the All-1970s First Team. He was also a critical figure, and perhaps the most important figure, on Pittsburgh's vaunted steel curtain defense that absolutely terrorized opposing offenses throughout the 1970s, perhaps most notably in 1976, when over the final 8 games of the season, the Steelers allowed an average of 2.7 points per game. You heard that right, less than a field goal per game. And with him on the defensive line, the Steelers made the playoffs 8 times, won the AFC Central 7 times, and won the Super Bowl 4 times. You can learn more about one of those Super Bowl wins by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Greene was probably the best defender in football in the 1970s, and you could make a legitimate argument that he is the greatest defensive tackle, maybe the greatest defensive lineman, and maybe even the greatest defensive player in the history of the sport. He was that good. But after the 1981 season, and after 13 seasons with the Steelers, he decided to hang it up, as he announced his retirement. He had no regrets. He said he was thinking about retirement after the 1980 season ended, and that it was time. For the 35-year-old, his plans for his post-playing days were to live and enjoy the easy life. But he would not be out of the game for long, because in his first job post-playing days, he would find himself up in the broadcast booth. When Greene first retired, he was not thinking about broadcasting, but somewhere down the line, as he said, the opportunity presented itself, and he was given a chance to audition with NBC to join their team. And Greene was interested in the opportunity, even if he didn't know how good he'd be at it, saying that even though he didn't want to go out there and make a fool of himself, he did want to try it. The audition, in his words, did not go well. As Greene said, "I was terrible." NBC executive producer Ted Nathanson didn't think it went as badly as that, or maybe he did and was just trying to be kind, as he said that Greene might have been hired by the network if the contract terms were better, or if they decided to go with a 3-man booth and have 2 color commentators. But Nathanson admitted that even though Greene was very nice to work with, and didn't give them any problems during the audition process, that he was going to have to work like crazy at it to get to where he wants to be. The bad news for Greene was that he was not hired by NBC, which had the AFC package to games. The good news, however, was that he got a chance to audition for CBS as well, which held the NFC package. And that audition, much like the NBC one, went terribly according to Greene. Still, CBS saw something in him, and decided that they were going to take a chance on the soon-to-be Hall of Famer. They were going to pair him up with Frank Lieber, a seasoned veteran who had been doing this with the network since 1963. The move to pair him with Lieber made a ton of sense, because Lieber knew how to work with players transitioning into the booth for the first time. After quarterback Johnny Unitas retired in 1973, Lieber was paired with him for the 1974 season. After running back Emerson Boozer retired in 1975, Lieber was paired with him for the 1976 season. Lieber excelled in this almost mentorship sort of role and had the experience to help Greene out. Despite that, you could just sense from the interviews that Greene was doing before going on the air that this was probably not going to work out. Greene worked the preseason game off the air just as a dress rehearsal, and Greene said that afterwards, he was drained, and that this was the hardest thing he'd ever tried to do. Always a good sign. And when asked about the hardest part of being a color commentator, he said that the hardest aspects were arriving early, asking questions, watching film, being able to talk, and fitting all the information in. In other words, the hardest part was literally everything. If your color commentator is saying that he's struggling with being able to talk, oh man, that's not good. But when week 2 of the 1982 season hit, Greene was officially ready to make his broadcasting debut. He was the newest member of the CBS Sports family. And holy cow, it was a disaster.
And this jersey was worn with great distinction for 13 seasons by the gentleman on my right. And Joe Greene today becomes a member of the CBS crew of analysts. And Joe, the kid said, since you're retiring, he now wants Leroy Selmans and to give it back to you.
There's a lot of memories in this jersey.
How's it feel being a rookie?
Oh, I tell you, it's tough, but I'm enjoying it.
What are you looking for in a color commentator? I think Ted Nathanson said it best when he said, you're looking for some articulate, bright personality that comes across on television. Someone who can describe why things are happening, give an overview, and explain strategy. If they have a sense of humor, that's all the better. In other words, you're looking for the analysis to be insightful, to be thought-provoking, and to even be witty at times. You want someone that's going to describe why things happen the way that they did. That's the mark of a great color commentator, like John Madden or Tony Romo. Joe Greene did not do that. His analysis was not insightful, thought-provoking, or witty. Rather, after listening to every single game that Joe Greene called, which was absolutely agonizing on the eardrums, I can break it up to 3 categories. It was either obvious, nonsensical, or completely contradicting to the point where you had no idea what his actual thoughts were. Let's start with the obvious analysis. A good color commentator doesn't just repeat what you just saw. Joe Greene did not get that memo. Take this play between Washington and Tampa Bay, where Greene just repeats what you saw with your own 2 eyeballs.
They fake here to James Owens, number 26, and they get the ball out here to Gordon Jones, number 84.
I definitely don't need an announcer for that. Or take this play between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Atlanta Falcons. Gerald Riggs got the handoff and picked up 37 yards. Greene is now going to attempt to break down what happened on this run.
As I was trying to get into this is a running play, a running formation. They were 20 yards behind, but you see here, the Cardinals was rushing and opened up a lane for Gerald Riggs to get in the open, then he turns on the speed.
According to Greene, this was a running play. Riggs got the ball and ran fast. Absolutely riveting analysis. Imagine having John Madden call your game one week on CBS and he's breaking this down with the telestrator and saying how the line did its job and what their assignments were, and then you have Joe Greene just saying that Riggs ran the ball on a running play. But in fairness to Greene, he played defense, so while his skills might not be sharp breaking down what the offense did, he might thrive when talking about a great defensive play, right? Well, that's where you'd be mistaken. Take this play right here. The Baltimore Colts are playing the Green Bay Packers, and on 3rd down, the Colts are able to get a sack, bringing Lynn Dickey to the ground and even forcing a fumble. Let's hear what Greene had to say about this great defensive line play.
Right from the right of your screen, you see Johnny Cook, number 88, come out and sack the quarterback, but as Frank stated, they lost the football.
Riveting insight, Joe. Don't know what we do without you. And how about this incredible thought-provoking insight during a game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Detroit Lions, where Greene blows all of our minds by telling us that a touchdown is better than a field goal.
You know, Frank, I always get nervous in a situation like this. When you go for the touchdown or the field goal, the touchdown makes me feel better.
Breaking news, 6 points is better than 3. If this insight wasn't blatantly obvious, it was completely nonsensical and made you wonder if he was watching the same game as you. Let's take this play from that same Buccaneers-Lions game. On 3rd down, the Bucs try a pass play into the end zone, but Doug Williams' pass falls incomplete. Joe Greene is now going to say what the Bucs should have done in this situation.
One of the best plays they got is throwing to Wilder coming out of the backfield out in the flat, and that would have been a safe play to get the 1st down.
Alright, on the surface, without any additional context, that doesn't seem like a horrible call on Greene's part. Get it to Wilder in the flat coming out of the backfield. But let's watch that play again. Here, you see Wilder coming out of the backfield and running into the flat. Here, you see a Lions player picking up Wilder perfectly, to the point where if this ball is thrown and Wilder catches it, Wilder will lose yardage. Greene was suggesting something that the Buccaneers tried to do, and was suggesting something that, if tried, would have lost yardage and, barring a miracle, would not have even come close to picking up the 1st down at the 7-yard line. And when he wasn't offering nonsensical insight on what coaches should have done, He was offering nonsensical insight on nonsensical things. When calling the Packers-Colts game, that one went into overtime, and it even wound up finishing in a tie. At the start of the overtime period, Greene was asked his thoughts about what it was like as a player to play an extra period. And I have no clue what Greene is trying to say here.
Been in a couple of playoff games. Players really don't like playoff games. You know, you spend yourself for 60 minutes, and you'd like to think that that's enough. But then the overtime games, in particular when the weather is bad like it is now, you want to get in and celebrate that victory. But as the Green Bay Packers and the Baltimore Colts, I'm sure can wait till this game is over because they want to go in victorious.
The good news is, I know those were English words that he was speaking. The bad news is, I have no idea what any of those words mean in that context. And I think he confused playoff games with overtime games, because the idea that players don't like playoff games is absurd. But as crazy and as awful as all those examples are, we are only scratching the surface. Because before I show the most confusing bit of announcing I've seen, as well as Joe Greene's worst work yet, we have to talk about the teleprompter. If you've ever watched an NFL game before, you know how they typically start. You see the announcers conversing in the booth, talking about key players and keys to the game. The play-by-play man will get the ball rolling, and the color commentator will expand and elaborate on that. Doing this serves two purposes for the viewer at home. Number one, it gets them ready for the game. It tells them who they have to look out for, what matchups are reported, and what players are entering this game on a hot or cold streak. But number two, it helps them prepare for the broadcaster. This is their first impression. This segment lets the audience member know right off the bat if the broadcaster did their homework and knows what they're talking about. So with that in mind, I'm just going to let this one play the entire way through, completely uninterrupted. Here is Joe Greene talking about the Cardinals-Falcons game.
Hi, everybody. I'm Frank Lieber, along with Joe Greene. This is the type of day you used to love to play in, wasn't it, Joe?
Today, we're going to take a look at Atlanta's offense. During the strike, Coach Lehman Bennett said that they were depending too much on the big play. He's revived that, and they said they were going to play for the first down as opposed to the touchdowns. They have added Gerald Riggs, their #1 draft choice, to the backfield. He has the size of a fullback and the speed of a halfback.
Now, they're going to be looking at an interesting defense, kind of a new defense for St. Louis, thanks to the acquisition of assistant head coach Floyd Peters this year.
Floyd Peters' history is from San Francisco to Detroit and developing some great defensive lines. Their forte being sacking the quarterback. They have gotten to the quarterback 12 times this year. Last week, Atlanta's quarterback Bartkowski wasn't sacked not once. This week, you can expect a little bit more pressure.
Where do I even begin with this? I've watched a lot of football, as longtime viewers of the channel can attest to. And this is hands down the worst pregame intro I've ever seen in my life. It's blatantly obvious that Greene is reading off of a teleprompter. There are so many stumbles that it's hard to understand what he's saying at times. There's no rhythm. It feels incredibly unnatural and not conversation-like. He seems so unprepared. How did this guy pass an audition to get into the booth? It's moments like this that make you wonder just what the heck CBS saw. Remember, this part is scripted. This is the easy part. This is the part that you can rehearse. Imagine being a fan and hearing that, and knowing that you've got to put up with that for 3 more hours. The game hasn't even started yet, and you already hate him and want to mute him. And amazingly enough, that might not even be Greene's worst moment in the booth. Because when Greene wasn't stumbling through his lines or offering blatantly obvious or nonsensical analysis, he was completely contradicting himself for no reason. Here's the situation. It's the Lions against the Buccaneers, and it's the fourth quarter with about 2 minutes left and the Lions up by 1. This is the biggest play of the game. On 3rd and 20, Doug Williams' pass to Kevin House falls incomplete. However, the Lions get called for pass interference on the play. It's a highly controversial play that sets the Bucs up in field goal range, and could wind up deciding not just the game, but the entire playoff picture for that 1982 season. Here is Joe Greene explaining why the pass interference penalty was the right and correct call by the officials.
But he bumped him while the ball was in the air. He was parallel with him. If it had been in front of him, it probably wouldn't have been a penalty.
And now, I present to you Joe Greene explaining 1 minute later with the same exact camera angle why this pass interference penalty was a horrible and absolutely atrocious call by the officials.
And he's playing the ball and not playing the receiver. And House ran into the back of him. And that's what they teach defensive backs is go to the reception area, cut the receiver off. And I don't know how you could have played it better.
Well, are you saying it's a bad call?
Sure, it's a bad call.
Was it a bad call?
It's a bad call.
So let me get this straight. You think that this was pass interference, that the defender bumped into the receiver, and they could have avoided having this penalty called on him if he played it out in front of him instead of bumping into the guy. Yet you also think this wasn't pass interference and was a bad call, and you have no idea what the defender could have done differently. How does that make any sense? If you think it's a good call, then say it. If you think it's a bad call, then say it. But how could you possibly think this was a good and a bad call at the exact same time? That does not make sense. I don't know how that makes sense. And it would be one thing if Greene said this and then changed his mind with a different camera angle, because that happens. And it's totally normal and healthy and encouraged to change your opinion when presented with new evidence. But this was the exact same camera angle. What are you doing? How did CBS see anything in your abilities as a broadcaster whatsoever? I think the most frustrating part about all of this is that it would be one thing if all these clips were coming from Greene's first game or two when he was going to be rusty. But he got better as the season went on and found his form and found his rhythm. But nope, there was no improvement whatsoever. If anything, he got worse. That Bucs-Lions pass interference clip, that was his last game of the season. That was when he was warmed up and had been doing quite a few games and knew the ins and outs of how this worked and what he was supposed to do. That teleprompter introduction incident, that was in the middle of November at the midway point of the season. You could just sense that this was not going to work out. And fortunately for viewers everywhere, the 1982 season would be Joe Greene's first and last season in the booth. Joe Greene worked a grand total of 6 games that season, thanks to the strike shortening the season to just 9 games. He didn't get any playoff assignments, to the shock of absolutely no one. And Greene was fully expecting to come back for the 1983 season, even despite a shaky rookie campaign. He seemed to be enjoying himself in the booth, and even despite being awful, was taking the whole thing seriously, even working during the 1982 offseason with Bill Mercer, a speech professor at North Texas State. Greene wanted to get better, admitting that he needed some work, and saying, "I am by no stretch of the imagination in the top 5, or top 10, or top 50 in the field, but I have the confidence in myself that I can do it." However, CBS wanted a top 50 broadcaster. They were so unimpressed with Greene that even despite Greene not working a whole lot of games, and even despite Greene having name recognition from his playing days, they decided to fire him after just 1 season. The network gave no reason as to why they fired Greene, but just judging by the audio clips, I think it's fairly obvious as to why they did. Greene was shocked and disappointed at the news, saying, "I feel confident that I can do it. Maybe I just couldn't do it the way they wanted. They told me I was making good progress before the strike, but not after it." And even though Greene believed in himself, he never stepped foot in the broadcasting booth for a regular season game ever again. He worked on some outside business ventures before getting back into football through the coaching and front office route later on with the Steelers. But his days as a broadcaster were done, and it's not hard to see why. Look, Greene gave it his best shot. He's a great player, and he never gave the impression that he wasn't trying to make this work. But some people just aren't cut out to be broadcasters, and name recognition alone isn't enough to make you good in the booth. Some of the best color commentators are players that were not good in the NFL, and some of the worst, like Jason Witten, are players that are bound for the Hall of Fame. And Joe Greene definitely falls into the latter category. Because when the kid in the Coke commercial told Greene that he was the best ever, he definitely wasn't talking about his broadcasting career. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9, and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.